the Cinema Gold podcast. I'm your host, Anyways. Today we're continuing our series, Somehow I Manage, reviewing The Office. We're now on season 8. But right now we'd like to thank our sponsors, Poddex, for sponsoring this ad for this episode. Use the promo code CinemaGold for 10% off your order. Looking back at my review of The Office Season 7, I had hoped that the writing staff would have a better handle of the upcoming season, seeing how Michael Scott was sent off. Unfortunately, that's not what happened in Season 8. The stories and characters are all over the map. Season 7 ended without revealing the next branch manager, Dunder Mifflin Scranton. The question was answered soon enough in the season premiere. The list, with Andy sitting in the corner office. Choice wasn't out of left field. It had some potential to bring new flavor to the show. The insecure manager who is in over his head and knows it, rather than the incompetent manager we've had for 7 seasons. But instead of properly cultivating Andy as a manager, they had him share the spotlight with James Spader's Robert California. Even when Andy did try to flex his managerial muscles as in Garden Party and Gettysburg, the storylines were too absurd to accept as a legitimate character development, yet not funny enough to make it worth pushing the reality of the show to an even more extreme degree. Speaking of Garden Party and Gettysburg, this season, there were quite a few outings that took the characters away from their office this year, including an entire arc set in Tallahassee, Florida. I'm assuming that this was to change things up and attempt to keep things fresh, but it didn't exactly work. There were times, like in Pool Party, where it felt like I was watching a different series. An Office spinoff, perhaps, instead of the show I knew and love. It wasn't always a problem with the locations themselves, but with the writing. By the time Andy and Aaron crashed a stranger's bachelorette party to break up with his bland girlfriend, I wish they'd been part of a different show. I'm not a fan of the Andy and Aaron relationship last season. Andy pined for Aaron while she was dating Gabe, so I guess it was Aaron's turn to carry the torch. But they didn't bother to give her any personality or defining characteristics, so I wasn't rooting for either side. There was also a potential romantic entanglement between Andy and Robert's wife in Mrs. California, but that went nowhere. The last few episodes of the season devoted a good deal of screen time getting Andy and Aaron back together, which proved to be a bit of a letdown after a run of some of the best episodes in a long time. These episodes made up the previously mentioned Tallahassee arc, which demonstrated that there is life and laughs left in this show when they get it right. Beginning with the episode Special Project, we get a great business-related arc centered around the launch of the Sabre store down in Florida. It was a silly idea, but the characters involved made it interesting and fun. We had some great moments between Dwight and Jim during that arc. Dwight got a chance to experience both the thrill and the stress of leadership, while Jim had his hands full fending off the affections of crazy Kathy. That little drama resolved better than I'd hoped. I enjoyed seeing Jim squirm and being forced to turn to Dwight for help. Their scenes together were some of the best of the whole season. Poor Kathy was punished for her actions by being banished from the show, never to be mentioned again. Ryan was true to character, talking a big game, but ultimately choking when his big moment came. And of course, we'll never forget you, Florida Stanley. For everyone else in the office, the stories were relatively minor. Pam and Angela both had babies named Philip, but the origin of Angela's pregnancy had much more intrigue to it. There were hints all along that the father of Angela's baby was not her state senator husband, but the issue resided on the back burner for the majority of the season. It wasn't until the finale that Dwight finally took the initiative to get the kid tested. We still don't even know the outcome, though they left little room for doubt. The only other plot of note was the subdued and sweet courtship of Daryl and the new warehouse foreman, Val. Val was one of the better new characters introduced this season. I also appreciated the expanded role in Nate, Dwight's former handyman who became a warehouse worker in Lotto. He's like Creed of the warehouse, stealing entire scenes with just a line or two. To be sure, every season of The Office has its ups and downs. It used to be that the peaks were steeper than the valleys. Now it's the opposite. At this time, last season, I didn't think the writers and cast had another season in them. And yet, next week, we'll be into season 9. At this point, you're too invested in the characters to give up on the show entirely. And by the end of this season, we see David Wallace in charge again, but with big changes in store and potential departures. It's hard to see how the show will recover the ground it's lost throughout the season. And now let's give out some Dundies. But once again, we want to thank our sponsor, Poddex, for sponsoring this episode. Use the promo code CinemaGold for 10% off your order. Poddex are a tool you can use to grow your podcast, engage with listeners, increase your downloads and your listens. So let's get on with the show. So, best cold openings of season 8, starting with number 1, is Closing Time. Andy sings Closing Time around the office every day. Not everyone is happy about it, except for Stanley, who knows that when the song hits, it's time to leave. Second one, Jim pranks Dwight by placing meatballs in odd spots to make Stanley laugh. However, it's not what you think it is. And at number 3, Dwight wakes up the entire Tallahassee team in the hotel extremely early for their project. Number 4, Dwight and Gabe have a leg curl competition, and you're seeing them soar when they have to walk into the conference room. Number 5, Oscar makes a It Gets Better video, but is interrupted by Robert, Kelly, and Kevin, all trying to chime in. And now on to my favorite episodes. Starting with number 5, Angry Andy. I've already stated how I very much hate Nellie taking over Andy's manager position. And this episode continues that storyline. Andy comes back from Florida with Aaron to discover his office and job taken. And when he confronts Nellie about it, all she can say is, nope. And even Robert, California takes Nellie's side. So it's very frustrating to watch when Nellie and Robert are so unlikable and Andy is so likable from a character standpoint. At this point, you just want the show to get rid of Robert and Nellie forever because it feels like they are ruining it. Not only are they unlikable, but Nellie gets close to tarnishing the show. When Andy finally stands up for himself at the end, he is fired. So it creates curiosity as to what will happen next. Lastly, Kelly is introduced to someone else, and Orion is desperate to get her back. But Kelly chooses the other guy. Not very interesting, but considering their long, strange relationship throughout the show, makes you wonder how long it will be before the two are back together again. And at number 4 is Lotto. This is Andy's revenge episode. After convincing David Wallace to buy back Dunder Mifflin, he plots his delicious moment to reveal this to the office, but he does it in typical Andy over-dramatic fashion. By trying to convince people he's a drunken janitor at rock bottom, he believes his moment will be extra delicious, but it just doesn't work out for him the way he figures. Still, I love what is all happening. David Wallace is once again CEO, just like the glory days. Andy replaces the dreadful Nellie as the rightful regional manager. Robert California is leaving. After a lackluster season 8, the season finale ends on a high note that gives us a lot of hope for the next season. And after all of that, this episode strongly suggests that Dwight is the father of Angela's child. And my next favorite is Free Family Portrait Studio. This is 8. My bad, I accidentally swapped the last two. Lotto. Daryl is a primary player in this episode, and he really brings it down. I love Daryl's character in this show, but in this episode, he's annoying with his zero motivation and his just fire me antics. After the warehouse crew wins the lottery, and he wasn't part of it, just wasn't the Daryl we know. There were some funny parts, though, such as Oscar busting out the car window at the beginning for the dog inside. Stanley, after his lunch was stolen, Kevin's creative idea to load the boxes faster, and Creed's classic line of, "I've already won the lottery. I was born in the US of A, baby." So at number 2 now is Pool Party. Before Robert California sells his mansion, he decides, with Kevin's idea, to throw one last hurrah, inviting the office over that night. There's a lot of good parts in this one and that are fun to watch. The swimming pool chicken fights, the skinny dipping, the Ryan versus Gabe competition, Jim desperately trying to leave the party, Oscar and Toby's wine talk, and everyone having an overall good time. Kevin's remark to Val of, "That's racist," when she asked him if Daryl doesn't swim was hilarious too. This is just one of those lighthearted episodes that I love about the show, where nothing is too serious and everyone is just having a good time. And the number 1 episode that I liked is Spooked. It's the 8th season's Halloween special. The most memorable thing was Robert California's spooky tale at the very end. Throughout the episode, he discreetly gathered what everyone's biggest fear was and combined them all in his tale as he told it. It was a very, very strange tale. And for that reason alone, it was memorable. This episode didn't deliver much else, though. Like always, I enjoy seeing the different costumes everyone in the office dressed up in. But the Andy Aaron back and forth was uninteresting, as well as the other biggest storyline about Pam and Jim's different beliefs about ghosts. The funniest scene, without a doubt, was when Gabe's Cinema of the Unsettling played on the TV in front of everyone, and seeing everyone's reactions, especially Stanley's, after the scene shot to him in his car. And now the Dundee for worst opening is Planking. This is one of the, I think, cheesiest that I've seen. Not a big fan of.
Don't try planking. It's
this cold
dangerous.
opening. And the worst episode of season 8. Doomsday. Here begins the worst run of Office episodes in the entire series. Doomsday and the 3 episodes that follow are just not up to snuff. In this one, Robert California complains about all the workplace blunders, and Dwight installs a Doomsday device that'll fire all the employees and virtually shutter the branch if too many mistakes are made. How? Emails are auto-sent to Robert. If a threshold is met, when it actually happens, Pam has to appeal to Dwight. And their game of chicken almost saves the episode. Almost. Dwight isn't at his best. While the main plot is goofy with no real stakes, some other strange things happen. Andy sings closing time at the end of each day, Gabe tries to impress Val and ask her out. Jim plays Robert in squash. Most people do not remember this episode, especially after watching the series. It's completely forgettable. And the Dundee for best episode is trivia. The episode is funny and enjoyable throughout its entire 22 minutes. The opening is funny when the office is on their historic silent streak. 20 minutes when Kevin takes a bite of a candy bar and says, "Oh yeah." And the premise of this episode is the office going to a bar in Philadelphia to compete in a trivia contest to win enough money to help reach the monthly quarterly. This leads to many funny moments as the Good Timers group of Kevin, Aaron, Kelly, and Meredith wind up winning the whole thing. Some of the answers given, whether right or wrong, were hilarious. Like Kelly knowing who won NBA's Sixth Man of the Year award because of keeping up with the Kardashians, and Jim and Daryl getting the answer wrong. And Dwight traveling down to Tallahassee to interview for a COO position had its moments as well. Definitely the best episode of the season. And like we just mentioned, best moment of season 8, Kevin leading his team to victory in the fluke of the century. You could never expect Kevin to actually come to the clutch when he's needed and win the trivia contest. And love him or hate him, Dundee for best character goes to Robert California. Originally only brought in for one-time cameo, Robert California, played by the voice of Ultron himself, James Spader. It's a hard character to read, but still one of my personal favorites. As Jim perfectly put it, he creeps me out, but I think he might be a genius. And the best prank is You've Been Meatballed. I actually enjoyed this prank the most of the season.
What is this, a meatball?
Especially how it all played out at the end. Which the last part surprised me.
It's always more fun to mess with Dwight with an audience. That was usually Pam. So now that she's out, I had to find someone else. Turns out that Stanley is quite the comedy fan. But not everything makes him laugh. He has very specific tastes. Through a painstaking process of trial and error, I found out what he likes. And it's really weird.
Jim, come on. So juvenile. What the?
You've been meatballed.
Oh.
Are you ready for some meatball?
Oh, man. This is not very clever, Jim.
I know.
Look for your stapler.
Really, Jim? Really? Very funny.
Okay, good night. What's a haul?
32 meatballs.
Good day.
That idiot's been feeding us for a week.
We'll never have to buy meatballs again.
And that is the end of this episode. Thank you for watching. Let us know what your thoughts are on this season of The Office. Did you enjoy it? Did you feel like it was falling apart throughout the season? Let us know in the comment section below. Be sure to like and subscribe to this video. And follow us on Twitter at CinemaGold2. And if you like our product, you can support the show and the podcast by buying us a coffee. buymeacoffee.com/cinemagold. Thank you, and we'll see you again later.